She walked into the courtroom alone. No lawyer, no family, nobody, while her billionaire husband stood on the other side with his pregnant mistress in his arm and 20 reporters waiting outside. Caleb Sterling had spent 6 months driving his wife insane in front of the entire city of New York. And that morning, he was certain he was about to finish her off completely. But when the courthouse doors opened for the last time, none of those present could have guessed what was about to enter. Please like and comment with the name of the city you're viewing from so I know how far this story has come. The rain came down hard that morning, the kind that turned Manhattan sidewalks into mirrors and made the city look like something out of a fever dream. It hammered the tall courthouse windows in sheets, irregular and furious, and inside the lobby of Manhattan's Supreme Court, the sound of it filled every silence the way bad memories do. Without permission, without end. Vanessa Moretti arrived at 7:43 in the morning, 47 minutes before the hearing was scheduled to begin. She came alone. That was the first thing the reporters noticed. The cluster of them already gathering beneath umbrellas on the courthouse steps despite the hour, their cameras fogged at the lenses from the cold. They photographed her anyway. They always photographed her anyway. She had learned to stop flinching at the sound of shutters 18 months ago, had trained herself to keep her eyes forward and her jaw level, and her hands very, very still, even when everything inside her was shaking like a building in a storm. She wore a charcoal wool suit, structured, clean, nothing about it that could be called emotional. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly, no jewelry. The absence of it was deliberate. Caleb had given her most of her jewelry, and she had boxed every piece 6 months ago and left it on the threshold of his Tribeca apartment without a note, without a word, without a single gesture that could be misread as longing. She had not looked back when she walked away from that door. She had cried in the elevator, though. That part she allowed. The lobby's security guard, a thick-necked man named Terrence, who had been working the same post for 11 years, gave her a small nod as she came through the scanner. He had seen her 3 times during preliminary hearings. He always nodded. She had stopped wondering whether that meant anything. She found the bathroom on the 2nd floor and stood at the sink for a long time looking at her own reflection. The woman looking back at her was 31 years old. She looked 42. Not in the way of aging poorly, but in the way of a person who had spent too many years absorbing impact without letting it show. There were lines at the corners of her eyes that had not been there 3 years ago. There was something careful in her expression, a guardedness so deep it had become structural, like load-bearing architecture. She turned on the cold water and pressed her fingertips under it until they went numb. This is the last morning, she told herself, one way or another. She dried her hands and went to the courtroom. Caleb Sterling arrived at 8:26 with the kind of entrance that required preparation. 2 black SUVs pulled up to the curb simultaneously. His legal team emerged first. 4 attorneys from one of the most expensive firms in the city, briefcases in hand, suits without a single wrinkle despite the rain. Then came the security detail, private contractors in charcoal blazers who spread themselves with practiced efficiency. And then Caleb. He stepped out beneath a black umbrella held by an assistant and stood for exactly long enough on the courthouse steps to let every camera find his face. He wore a navy suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. His hair was perfect. His expression was that particular blend of aggrieved dignity and confidence that photographed beautifully and communicated to every observer that he was the reasonable one in this situation, the put-upon one, the successful man being dragged through unnecessary suffering by a woman who didn't know how good she'd had it. Behind him, Brielle Kane stepped out of the second SUV. Brielle was 26, blonde, visibly pregnant at 6 months, and dressed in a cream-wrap dress that made her look like a deliberate contrast to everything Vanessa represented. She took Caleb's arm at the steps, and he let her, and every camera in that cluster fired at once because that was exactly what he had orchestrated. A visual declaration, a statement before a single word of testimony had been spoken. This is my future. The old one was a mistake. Inside the courtroom, Vanessa heard the sound of the crowd shifting outside and understood immediately what it meant. She did not turn around to look. She kept her eyes on the legal notepad in front of her and the uncapped pen beside it, and the glass of water that one of the clerks had placed on the table without being asked. Her attorney, a sharp-featured woman named Diane Chu, who had been doing matrimonial litigation for 23 years, and had stopped being surprised by anything approximately 15 years ago, sat down beside her and opened her file. "He brought her," Diane said flatly. "I know. For the record, I know," Vanessa said again, quieter. Diane studied her for a moment, then turned back to her file without further comment. She had learned in the first meeting that Vanessa Moretti did not need to be prepared for pain. She had already survived most of it. What she needed was precision. Caleb moved through the courtroom with the ease of a man who believed the room already belonged to him. He greeted his attorneys with clipped words and handshakes. He acknowledged the bailiff with a nod. He let his eyes sweep the space the way a property owner surveys a room, cataloging, assessing, calculating value. Then his gaze landed on Vanessa. He crossed to her table. She had not expected that. Neither had Diane, who stiffened slightly beside her but said nothing, because Caleb's attorney was already moving in the same direction, and stopping him now would create a scene. Caleb leaned down, one hand flat on the defense table beside Vanessa's notepad, close enough that she could smell the same cologne he had worn throughout their entire marriage. Sandalwood, and something sharper underneath, something pharmaceutical. "You should have signed quietly," he said, his voice low and smooth and perfectly controlled. "When I gave you the chance, now everyone gets to watch you disappear." Vanessa looked at his hand on the table, not at him, at his hand. There was a thin white scar on the back of his right index finger from a cooking accident she had cleaned and bandaged herself during the first year of their marriage, when she still believed she had married someone worth taking care of. She said nothing. Caleb waited for a response. She didn't give him one. He straightened after a moment, adjusted his jacket, and walked back to his table. And Vanessa thought she heard him exhale. Not quite a laugh, but close to one. The hearing began. Judge Harold Myers had been on the Manhattan bench for 19 years. He was the kind of judge who had heard every variation of human failure that marriage could produce and had developed a face that communicated nothing personal about any of it. He opened the proceedings with the brisk efficiency of a man who had 3 more hearings scheduled after this one and intended to stay on schedule regardless of what the tabloids said. Caleb's lead attorney, a man named Garrison Ford, who had the jawline of someone who had been told all his life that he looked trustworthy, opened first. He spoke for 22 minutes. He talked about Vanessa's instability, her inability to maintain appropriate boundaries with her family of origin, her documented history of emotional volatility. He used the word erratic 4 times. He used the word unstable 7 times. He used phrases like pattern of behavior, and ongoing psychological distress, and inability to fulfill basic marital obligations in a tone so measured and reasonable that every sentence sounded like something a concerned friend might say, rather than what it actually was. A systematic dismantling of a person's credibility designed to make a jury, a judge, a camera crew, and a court reporter all arrive at the same conclusion before the other side had spoken a single word. Vanessa kept her eyes on the notepad. She wrote nothing on it. She just needed something to look at that wasn't Caleb's face. Diane's opening was 15 minutes long and almost entirely comprised of documentation. No rhetoric, no emotional framing. Diane Chu's philosophy in litigation was that feelings were ammunition you handed to the opposing counsel, and she had gone through Vanessa's case with surgical precision over the previous 5 months, building something from receipts and records and photographs and timestamps that did not ask anyone to feel anything. It simply showed them what had happened, one documented fact at a time. When Diane sat down, Caleb leaned over to say something to Garrison Ford, and whatever he said made Ford allow himself a very small smile before resettling his expression. The first witness called was Dr. Margaret Ossie, a forensic financial expert retained by Vanessa's team, who had spent the better part of 4 months analyzing the financial structure of the Sterling household during the marriage. She was a small, calm woman with a voice like a metronome, absolutely even, impossible to rattle, and she sat in the witness box and explained in clinical detail how Caleb had gradually moved every significant marital asset into corporate entities that predated their marriage on paper, but had actually been restructured during it, effectively ensuring that by the time the divorce was initiated, Vanessa had legal claim to almost nothing, despite contributing significantly to the social and reputational infrastructure that had grown his company's valuation by $340 million in 4 years. The numbers were large. The methodology was complex. Garrison Ford objected 17 times during the testimony. Judge Myers sustained 4 of them. Vanessa listened to all of it and felt something strange happen inside her chest. Not relief, not satisfaction, but a kind of recognition, like watching someone finally put words to a thing you had known in your body for years without being able to name it. He stole from me, she thought. Not just the money. All of it. The court broke for 15 minutes at 10:30. Vanessa went to the hallway and stood by a window overlooking the rain-darkened street below. Diane appeared beside her with a paper cup of coffee and handed it over without saying anything. Vanessa drank it. "Is he nervous?" she asked. "Garrison Ford never looks nervous." "Not Ford. Caleb." Diane considered the question with the objectivity of someone paid to read rooms professionally. "He's adjusting," she said finally. "He came in expecting this to feel more like a performance. It's starting to feel more like a trial." "Because it is one. He doesn't think of himself as someone who gets tried for things." Vanessa held the paper cup in both hands. Outside, a cab cut across 2 lanes without signaling, and the driver behind it leaned on the horn, and the sound reached them faintly through the glass, muffled and distant, the ordinary noise of a city that had no idea what was happening in this building. "He told me once," Vanessa said quietly, "that powerful men don't get consequences. That consequences are what happen to people who can't afford to prevent them." Diane looked at her. "He said that. During our 2nd year, we were having dinner. There was a news story about some hedge fund manager being indicted. He turned off the television and said that." Vanessa finished the coffee. "I thought he was just being arrogant. I didn't understand yet that it was how he actually understood the world." She crushed the paper cup and dropped it into a trash bin beside the window. "I understand it now," she said. "That's the difference." They went back inside. The afternoon session opened with witness testimony from 2 former Sterling Capital employees. A compliance officer named Darren Bates, who had been let go 18 months ago under circumstances that were described in his severance agreement as mutual, and a data analyst named Song Wei, who had left voluntarily after 3 years and was soft-spoken in a way that made each word hit harder than louder ones might have. Both testified to elements of the financial restructuring. Both had signed supplemental affidavits within the previous 3 weeks. Caleb watched both witnesses with the particular expression of a man encountering betrayal. Not surprised, not hurt, but recalibrating threat levels, cataloging, planning. His jaw was very tight. His hands on the table in front of him were very flat and very still. Vanessa recognized that stillness. It was the stillness that came before the other thing. During the cross-examination of Song Wei, Garrison Ford attempted to introduce Vanessa's medical history, specifically a prescription for anxiety medication she had been taking since the 2nd year of the marriage, which the Sterling legal team had framed in earlier filings as evidence of the psychological instability they had been advertising all morning. Diane was on her feet before Ford finished the sentence. "Objection, Your Honor. Relevance. Counsel is attempting to use a medical record obtained outside the proper discovery channel to impugn the credibility of a witness who is not Dr. Moretti." "Your Honor, the witness interacted daily with Mrs. Sterling during the period in question, and her account of those interactions is directly relevant." "Then question her about those interactions," Judge Myers said sharply. "Not about documents that weren't in your disclosure." He turned to Ford with the specific look of a judge who has seen this particular move before. "Try again, counselor." Ford tried again, differently, and Song Wei answered his questions with the patient precision of someone who had anticipated them and found them smaller than expected. By 3 in the afternoon, the light outside had shifted from rain gray to something darker, more definitive, like the sky deciding to take a position. Then Diane stood and said, "Your Honor, the petitioner would like to introduce Exhibit 44. And the room changed. Exhibit 44 was a recording. It was 14 minutes and 22 seconds long. It had been made without Caleb's knowledge during an argument in the Sterling residence approximately 13 months ago, on a night when Vanessa had been wearing a small recording device that had been left in her possession by someone she had not yet named in any filing and would not name now. The recording played through the courtroom's speaker system. Caleb's voice filled the room, not the controlled, modulated, publicly calibrated voice he had been using all morning, but the other voice, The one Vanessa had heard behind closed doors, the one that lived underneath the Garrison Fords, and the navy suits, and the perfectly held umbrellas. It was low and precise, and carrying the specific temperature of a man who had stopped needing to hide what he was in front of the person he had already decided to stop respecting. "You don't have anything without me," the recording said. "You understand that? You never had anything. You came from nothing. Your family are criminals. You should be grateful I let you use my name this long." Then Vanessa's voice, quieter, trying to be steady. "I'm asking you to stop." "Stop what?" "Talking to me like that." A pause. The sound of something being set down. A glass, a bottle, something heavy. "Like what, Vanessa?" "Like what you are." The recording ran for the rest of the 14 minutes. Nobody in the courtroom moved. Garrison Ford objected twice, but both objections were reflexive and perfunctory, the legal equivalent of covering your face when you know the blow is already landing. Caleb Sterling sat very still at his table. Vanessa kept her eyes forward. She had listened to that recording 3 times with Diane during case preparation and had kept herself together each time through the specific discipline of a woman who had spent years not falling apart in front of people who would use it against her. But today there was something different about hearing it in this room, in this acoustically flat space full of strangers and cameras and the rain still coming down outside, something that made the air feel very thin. She breathed through it, slow, careful. When the recording ended, Judge Myers removed his glasses and set them on the bench in front of him and said nothing for a long moment. Then Caleb stood up. Not at his attorney's direction. Garrison Ford reached for his arm immediately, but Caleb shook it off, a sharp jerking motion, and stood fully upright and looked at the judge with the expression of a man who had spent so long operating above consequences that he had briefly forgotten where he was. "Your Honor," he said, "this is a manufactured—" "Mr. Sterling, sit down," Judge Myers said. "The authenticity of that recording hasn't been established. Your counsel will address that through proper channels. Sit down." Caleb sat, but his eyes went to Vanessa, and in them was something she had seen before. Not anger exactly, not even hatred, but the specific look of a person who has realized they are losing and has decided to make losing as costly as possible for everyone around them. She held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked away, because she had spent 3 years trying to stare down a man who took everything she offered and called it weakness, and she was finished paying that particular toll. The hearing recessed at 4:15. In the hallway outside the courtroom, the noise level jumped immediately. Caleb's team clustered in rapid conference 30 feet away, Ford's voice low and clipped, and the other attorneys moving in tight formation around their client. Vanessa watched them from across the corridor and thought about architecture, about how every structure that looks imposing from the outside is actually held together by a very few critical points, and how the failure of one critical point can take down the whole thing in ways the structure itself never anticipates. Diane appeared beside her. "The judge's clerk confirmed we're back at 9 tomorrow morning. The financial testimony from Osei continues, and then they'll have a chance to cross-examine. Ford will come in harder tomorrow. He knows the recording damaged them." "How much?" Diane considered the question honestly, which Vanessa had specifically asked her to always do, regardless of what the honest answer was. "Enough that they'll change strategy overnight. Tomorrow will be different." Vanessa nodded. She looked at the window at the far end of the hallway where the late afternoon light was making the wet city below look briefly beautiful the way it sometimes did in the last hour before dark. All the grime transformed by water and distance into something approaching grace. "There's something I haven't told you," Vanessa said. Diane went very still beside her in the professional way. "Something that affects the case? Something that might affect tomorrow." She did not get to say what it was, because at that moment the elevator at the end of the hall opened and 6 men stepped out, large, quiet, moving with the unhurried precision of people who are never in a hurry because the world always waits for them. And they spread immediately across the corridor in a formation so practiced it looked almost architectural. Every conversation in the hallway stopped, not because of the 6 men, because of the man who walked out of the elevator behind them. He wore a black overcoat that was still damp from the rain, and he walked down the center of that hallway without looking at anyone, and people moved out of his way without being asked the way crowds part, for something that the body recognizes before the mind catches up. Lucien Devereaux was 44 years old. He was not especially large. He was not especially loud. He had gray eyes that looked like something in them had been cold for a very long time, and a quality of presence that was not charisma. Charisma asks to be liked, and this man had never in his adult life cared whether anyone liked him, but rather the absolute uncommunicative confidence of a man who has never needed to prove anything to anyone in any room. He walked the length of the hallway until he was standing in front of Vanessa. He looked at her the way people look at something that they have been thinking about for a long time and have finally arrived to see in person. "How did it go?" he said. His voice was low, private, intended for her alone. Vanessa exhaled slowly. "Better than I expected," she said. "Worse than I hoped." Lucien's eyes moved briefly across the corridor to where Caleb's legal team had gone completely, absolutely silent. Then he looked back at her. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "will be different." It was the same sentence Diane had used. It meant something completely different coming from him. And 30 feet away, Caleb Sterling stood among his attorneys watching a man he recognized. Because you did not operate in the financial and political waters of the East Coast without knowing who Lucien Devereaux was, without understanding the weight the name carried and the silence it commanded. Watching this man stand in a courthouse hallway and speak quietly to Vanessa in the way that people speak to each other when they share something the rest of the world doesn't have access to. Caleb's face went through 3 expressions in approximately 2 seconds. Confusion, recognition, fear, not the ordinary fear of a bad day or a lost case, the deeper kind, the kind that lives in the stomach and doesn't leave. Diane leaned close to Vanessa. "You want to tell me now," she said carefully, "what it was you were going to say?" Vanessa looked at Lucien. Lucien looked at Caleb. And in the long humming silence of that hallway, the rain still coming down outside, the city churning below, the fluorescent lights of Manhattan Supreme Court flickering almost imperceptibly overhead, something shifted in the architecture of the situation, some critical point bearing a weight it had been designed to carry for exactly this long, and no longer. "Tomorrow," Vanessa said softly, almost to herself, "he's going to try to destroy the recording, and when that fails, he's going to try something else, something worse." Diane was quiet for a moment. "How do you know that?" Vanessa didn't answer immediately, because the answer was complicated, because the answer involved 3 months of midnight phone calls, and a man who had spent those months building something out of patience and precision and the kind of knowledge that only exists at the intersection of enormous power and very old score settling. Because the answer involved the things she had done that she hadn't yet told anyone, the choice she had made at 2 a.m. in her empty apartment that had felt like the only move left and had turned out to be the move that changed everything. "Because," she said finally, "I know what Caleb does when he's cornered." She paused. "And I know what's waiting for him when he does it." The hallway emptied faster than it should have. That was the first thing Diane noticed. Not the arrival of Lucien Devereaux specifically, not the 6 men who had spread themselves across the corridor with the quiet efficiency of people who do this professionally, and have never once had to explain themselves afterward, but the speed at which everyone else found somewhere else to be. Court clerks who had been standing at the copy machine near the elevator. A junior associate from Caleb's firm who had been checking his phone against the wall. A bailiff who had been eating a granola bar near the stairwell door. All of them suddenly remembered obligations in other parts of the building with a unanimity that could not have been coordinated but felt like it. Diane Chu had been practicing law for 23 years. She understood rooms. This one had just told her something she was going to need time to fully process. She looked at Vanessa, who was standing very still beside her, and for the first time in 5 months of working together, Diane saw something in her client's face that wasn't careful control. It wasn't relief either. It was something more complicated than both of those things. The expression of a person watching 2 parts of their life that they had believed were permanently separated stand within 10 feet of each other in a courthouse hallway. "How long?" Diane asked. Vanessa understood the question without needing it finished. 3 months, she said. "And you didn't tell me." "No." Diane closed her file folder with a deliberateness that communicated exactly what she thought about that. Vanessa, if there is any dimension of your relationship with this man that the opposing counsel can weaponize, there isn't. I need to be the one who decides that. I know. Vanessa finally looked at her. I'm sorry. I needed to be sure it was going to matter before I introduced it into the case. And now? Vanessa's eyes moved briefly back to Lucian, who was standing 6 feet away and had not moved and was not looking at either of them, but rather at some middle distance past the window that probably contained Caleb Sterling's reflection in the wet glass without Caleb being aware he was being watched. Now I think it's going to matter, Vanessa said. Across the hallway, Caleb was in a tight cluster with Garrison Ford and 2 of the other attorneys, and the conversation happening inside that cluster was not going well. Caleb's jaw was doing the thing Vanessa had learned to recognize in year 2. That particular tightening that meant the performance of calm was being maintained at significant effort. Ford had his hand on Caleb's arm in a way that looked supportive from a distance and was almost certainly restraining. Brielle Kane sat on a bench against the wall 15 feet from the attorneys, her hands folded over her rounded belly, watching the cluster with the expression of a woman who had signed up for something specific and was beginning to understand that the specific thing might not be what she had thought it was. Vanessa did not feel anything about Brielle. She had tried to feel something: anger, contempt, some form of female solidarity for a woman who had been used by the same man in different ways. But every time she examined the space where that feeling should have been, she found only exhaustion. The clean, flat exhaustion of someone who had spent too long caring about things that Caleb had curated specifically to make her care about. Brielle was not the problem. Brielle had never been the problem. Lucien turned from the window. He looked at Diane with the gray eyes that communicated nothing warm and everything necessary. Ms. Chu, he said. Not a greeting exactly. An acknowledgement. The kind one professional gives another when they've researched each other. Diane received it with the equivalent levelness. Mr. Devereaux. I won't be in the courtroom tomorrow morning, he said. I need Vanessa to understand that before tonight. What I've prepared will be delivered through proper channels, through people whose names can be in front of a judge without complicating the evidentiary record. Diane looked at Vanessa. Vanessa looked at Lucian. You're not coming, she said. It wasn't a question, but it held weight. Not in the morning. He paused. The afternoon is different. Something passed between them in that pause. Not words, not gesture, but the specific compressed communication of people who have had many conversations that the rest of the world wasn't present for and have developed a shorthand for the things that matter most. Diane cleared her throat. I'm going to need a full briefing tonight, she said to Vanessa. Everything, not the version you decided I needed. Everything. I know. 7 o'clock, my office. I'll be there. Diane gave Lucien a look that was not unfriendly and was not deferential and communicated with precision that she was a person who operated by specific rules in specific domains, and she expected those rules to be respected even by people who were accustomed to writing their own. Then she picked up her briefcase and walked toward the elevator. Lucien watched her go with something that might have been respect. She's good, he said. She's excellent, Vanessa said. She doesn't know enough. She will tonight. A pause. The building around them produced its ordinary sounds, the distant percussion of doors, the hum of the HVAC system, the muffled noise of the city outside. Normal sounds. The sounds of a Tuesday afternoon in a public building where ordinary things were supposed to happen. He recognized you, Vanessa said. Yes. How bad is that? Lucien considered the question with the honesty she had come to understand was his default. Not reassurance, not management, but the actual assessment. For him, very bad. For you? Depends on what he does with the fear. He looked toward the cluster of attorneys across the hall, which had tightened further. Frightened men are unpredictable. That's the variable. You've dealt with frightened men before. Always. He said it flatly, without drama. But not men with access to federal contacts and public platforms and a narrative already running. Caleb Sterling can't hurt me, but he can make tomorrow complicated if he decides that burning everything down is better than losing carefully. Vanessa absorbed that. "What did you bring?" she asked. "What he never thought anyone would find." Lucian's voice was quiet enough that it barely carried between them. "He hid it well, but the people who helped him hide it are more afraid of me than they are of him. That calculus changed approximately 8 weeks ago." 8 weeks, Vanessa repeated. "You've had it for 8 weeks." "I've had pieces of it for 8 weeks. The complete picture took longer." He paused. "I wanted to be certain. I didn't want to bring you something that could be challenged. I wanted something that ends it." Mopo, she looked at him directly then, the way she rarely let herself look at him in public spaces. The full attention, the unguarded version. "What does it end?" she asked. "Just the marriage?" Lucien held her gaze. "The marriage," he said, "and what he built under it." At 6:40 that evening, Garrison Ford called Caleb Sterling's private number from a blocked line using a burner phone he kept in the inside pocket of his suit jacket for exactly this category of conversation. Caleb answered on the first ring. "Tell me." "The recording is a problem," Ford said. "Authenticity challenges will slow it down, but they won't eliminate it. The forensic audio work we can commission overnight, but judges in this court don't respond well to delay tactics on evidentiary matters when the opposing counsel is Chu. She'll be prepared for every challenge." "Then what are we doing?" "We're reassessing." Ford's voice was level. Caleb paid him significantly to stay level in moments where other people would not. "I need to know about Devereaux." Silence. "Caleb, I heard you. What is he doing in this case? What is his connection to Vanessa?" More silence. Through the phone, Ford heard the sound of traffic, which meant Caleb was outside, moving, which meant he was too agitated to stay in one place. "How long have they known each other?" Ford pressed. "A long time," Caleb said finally. "Before me. Her father's world." Ford processed that quickly, efficiently. So she went back to what she came from. She went back to someone specific. A pause. "I always knew she wasn't as clean as she pretended. I told people that, Caleb, this is not the moment for vindication. This is the moment for strategy." Ford stopped walking. He was in the parking structure, 3 blocks from his office, having taken the long route specifically to avoid being overheard. "If Devereaux is in this case in any formal capacity, we need to know what he's brought. If he's in it informally, we need to understand what that means for your exposure." "My exposure?" "Yes. But I'm the victim here, Marcus, that woman. You are currently a defendant in a divorce proceeding with a 14-minute recording of your own voice and evidence," Ford said, and the leveling in his tone sharpened just slightly, just enough to cut through. "And Lucien Devereaux just appeared in the courthouse hallway. Whatever you think you are in this situation, you are not protected in the way you were this morning. I need you to understand that so we can make decisions that account for it." Long pause. "What kind of decisions?" "That depends on what you know about what he has," Ford said. "Think carefully. In the years since Vanessa left her family, anything that touched both worlds, anything that touched you, and anything connected to the Moretti name, however indirectly." The silence this time was different. It was the silence of someone going through a mental inventory and finding something in it they had almost forgotten, something they had buried deep enough to convince themselves it wasn't there anymore. "There was one thing," Caleb said slowly. Ford waited. "A subsidiary, 2 years ago. I used a holding company that had... There was a chain of ownership that I didn't fully trace at the time. I didn't know who was at the end of it." Ford closed his eyes briefly. "And now?" "Now I think I know." Diane's office was on the 31st floor of a building on Lexington Avenue that smelled like old wood and professional neutrality. She had the kind of office that communicated competence rather than warmth. No personal photographs, a plant that was real but undemonstrative, filing systems so organized they were almost architectural. At 7:15, after Vanessa had talked for one uninterrupted hour, Diane sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. "Tell me again about the subsidiary," she said. "Lucien's people traced a chain of corporate entities that Caleb used for 2 transactions in 2021. Shell companies inside shells, inside holding companies. Standard obfuscation." Vanessa had her hands folded in her lap. She had not moved much during the hour. Talking through it had required a stillness from her, a deliberateness. At the end of that chain, one of the entities had original capitalization connected to money that passed through a port logistics company in Savannah that Lucien has an interest in. Caleb used Lucien's money without knowing it. Without knowing whose it was, yes. And Lucien found out. 18 months ago, which is approximately when I made my call. Diane absorbed this. So his involvement it was not purely about me, Vanessa said steadily. No. I've never told myself otherwise. Caleb stumbled into Lucien's territory without knowing it, and when I called, Lucien had already been aware of Caleb for months. What I gave him was the personal dimension, the context. She paused. And he gave me something back. Which was? The decision to do this through the courts instead of the other way. Diane looked at her. He had options, Vanessa said. Men in his position always have options that don't involve courtrooms. He chose this one, because I asked him to. The office was quiet for a moment. And the material he's sending through proper channels tomorrow, Diane said carefully. The evidence, he says, ends it. Yes. What is it, Vanessa? Specifically. Vanessa looked at her. Caleb has been brokering Access, software Access, one of his tech subsidiaries, the one he restructured to look like it predated the marriage, has backdoor agreements with 3 buyers that the federal government would classify as hostile actors. He's been doing it for 14 months. He used the holding structure to hide the money flow, and the communication structure to hide the contact chain. She breathed evenly. Lucien has the documentation, the communications, the financial transfers, the identity of the buyers. Diane was very still. That's not a divorce case anymore, she said. No, Vanessa agreed. It stopped being just a divorce case approximately 8 weeks ago when Lucien's people finished the chain of evidence. The federal dimension has already been communicated to people who will be in the building tomorrow afternoon. Vanessa held Diane's gaze. I'm telling you now because you need to know before tomorrow so you're not caught off guard. And because you're right. You should have known sooner. Diane stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at Lexington Avenue below, at the ordinary chaos of evening traffic, at the people who had no idea what was happening in this room and would read about it in 3 days in a way that would make it feel inevitable in retrospect, the way things always feel inevitable after they've already happened. If this goes federal, she said, the divorce proceeding becomes secondary. The asset question gets complicated by seizure orders. Our timeline, Lucien's people have accounted for the sequencing. The civil case stays intact. The asset freeze Caleb will face won't affect the marital estate, because the evidence clearly distinguishes the criminal enterprise from the marital assets. It was built that way deliberately. Diane turned. He built the evidentiary package to protect your divorce settlement. Yes. While simultaneously preparing to hand a federal case to investigators. Yes. Diane looked at her client. This woman who had spent 3 years being erased by a man who mistook her endurance for weakness and felt something she rarely allowed herself in professional contexts, something adjacent to admiration and adjacent to sorrow, and not quite either. You should have been a strategist, she said. I was, Vanessa said quietly. I just spent too long using it to survive instead of to fight. At 11:40 that night, Caleb Sterling sat in the study of his Tribeca apartment with a glass of scotch he hadn't touched, and his phone face down on the desk in front of him, and the city throwing light against his windows in the orange and white patterns he had always loved and currently could not see at all. Brielle was asleep in the bedroom. She had tried to talk to him after he came in. He had not been unkind about ending the conversation. He had simply been unreachable, which was a different thing, and she had understood it well enough to stop trying because Brielle Kane was not a stupid woman. She was a woman who had made a specific calculation and was beginning to wonder whether the math had been right. Caleb turned the phone face up. The last message from Garrison Ford read, Caleb, I need you to think very carefully about what I said. If there's anything connected to that holding structure that we haven't discussed, you need to tell me tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight. He had not responded. He sat in the study of the apartment he had bought for $3.4 million during the second year of the marriage he was now losing and thought about the specific thing he had not told Ford, the thing he had buried in language designed to make it disappear. in layers of corporate structure designed to make the money look clean, in a chain of decisions he had made when he believed the consequences of them were safely beyond anyone's reach. He had been wrong about that. He understood that now. The question was what understanding it too late actually meant. He picked up the glass of scotch, set it back down without drinking. He thought about Lucien Devereaux standing in that courthouse hallway and the specific thing that had happened in his body when he recognized him. Not fear in the ordinary sense, not the fear of confrontation or even of violence, but something colder, something that came from understanding at a structural level that he had been operating for 14 months inside a trap he had mistaken for an opportunity, and that the man who had set it had been watching him walk deeper into it with a patience that made Caleb feel, for the first time in his adult life, genuinely small. He picked up his phone. Not to call Ford, he opened a different contact, one that was not saved under a real name, one that existed in his phone under a single letter, a communication channel he had used 4 times in 14 months, and had told himself he would never use again after the last time. He stared at it. His thumb hovered. Because Garrison Ford was right about frightened men being unpredictable, and Caleb Sterling was very frightened, and in his fear he was about to do the thing that frightened men almost always do. Not the intelligent thing, not the careful thing, but the thing that feels like control when control is what you're losing, the escalation that feels like agency and is actually the final step into a space you cannot come back. Caleb's thumb pressed the contact. The message was 4 words. We need to talk. He sent it at 11:51 in the evening and put the phone face down again and sat in the dark study and waited. And the city outside his windows kept doing what it always did. Indifferent, continuous, enormous. And for the first time in his adult life, Caleb Sterling felt the specific vertigo of a man who has made every decision from a position of assumed power and is only now, in the silence of a room he bought with money he may not be able to keep, beginning to understand what it feels like to not have any. The response came in 6 minutes. A single character. A location. Todd. The place was a parking structure in the West 30s, the kind that had been built in the 70s and never significantly updated. Low ceilings, flickering fluorescents, the smell of oil and standing water and concrete that had absorbed decades of exhaust. At 12:40 in the morning, it was nearly empty, just 3 cars on the level Caleb had been directed to, and the sound of his own footsteps bouncing off the walls with a flatness that made the space feel smaller than it was. He saw the car first, black, domestic, idling without headlights near the far wall. He walked toward it. The window came down. The man inside was named Victor Hale, and he was not the kind of person whose name appeared in articles or filings or any public record that Caleb was aware of. He was the kind of person who existed in the specific shadow between legitimate enterprise and the other kind, who had made himself useful to several people across several industries and maintained that usefulness by being reliably invisible. Caleb had been introduced to him through a mutual contact 14 months ago in a conversation that had been framed as an introduction to investment opportunity and had understood approximately halfway through that meeting that the opportunity in question was not the kind you discussed with your board. He had done it anyway. That was the thing he had told himself he would not examine too closely. Victor looked at him from the driver's seat with the flat patience of a man who has had many late-night meetings in parking structures and found none of them surprising. "You look terrible," Victor said. "Devereaux was at the courthouse today." Victor's expression did not change. "I know." Caleb stared at him. "You know." "Sit down, Caleb. You're standing in a parking garage at 1 in the morning. Stop performing." Caleb opened the passenger door and got in. The car smelled like cigarettes and something synthetic, air freshener over something older. He closed the door. "How long have you known he was involved?" Caleb said. 6 weeks? The number landed like a physical thing. Caleb felt it in his sternum. 6 weeks, he repeated. Give or take. "And you didn't tell me." Victor turned to look at him directly for the first time, and in the low light of the parking structure, his face had the quality of something that had stopped pretending to be warmer than it was. "Telling you 6 weeks ago would have changed your behavior in ways that made everything worse. You would have panicked. You would have moved money, pulled contacts, made phone calls that would have been logged. I was managing the situation." "You were managing—" Caleb stopped, breathed. What situation exactly? What do you know about what he has? Victor reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a folded paper. Not a phone, not a screen, an actual sheet of paper with actual printing on it, which Caleb understood immediately meant this was information Victor did not want existing in any device. He handed it over. Caleb unfolded it. He read it in the dim light. It took him 40 seconds. By the end of those 40 seconds, the paper was shaking slightly in his hands, not dramatically, just the fine vibration of a man whose body has registered something his mind is still refusing to fully process. "This is everything," Caleb said. "Yes. The transfers, the communication logs, the identities of the buyers." "Yes." "How does he have the identities of the buyers?" "Those were—" Caleb stopped. Something moved through his expression, a rapid sequence of realizations assembling themselves into a shape he didn't want to look at directly. "The intermediary, the contact that introduced me to the initial buyer." "Was one of Devereaux's people," Victor said. "Yes." The parking structure was very quiet. Somewhere several levels above them, a car started and moved toward the exit ramp, the sound of it spiraling up and away until it was gone. "From the beginning," Caleb said. "From the beginning. He set this up, the entire transaction chain. He put the opportunity in front of me through people I trusted, and I walked into it, and he documented every step." "You walked into it very willingly," Victor said, with no particular judgment in it, just the observation. Caleb set the paper on the dashboard in front of him and stared at it. 14 months ago, he had believed he was making a move that was hidden from everyone. He had believed the layering of the corporate structure was thorough enough, the intermediaries obscure enough, the money movement clean enough. He had believed that the worst possible outcome was regulatory scrutiny of a subsidiary that could be sold or dissolved before anyone looked too closely. He had not believed he was being watched from the first conversation. He had not believed that the opportunity was a door built specifically for him to walk through. "Vanessa knew," he said. Victor was quiet for a moment. "Vanessa called him 3 months ago," Caleb said. "But Devereaux already had this. He already had the whole chain before she called him. So what did she give him?" "Context," Victor said. "She told him about the marriage, the money structure, what you'd done to her. He already knew about the transaction chain from his own monitoring. What he didn't have was the picture of who you were privately, what you were capable of, whether you'd be likely to keep escalating or try to cut losses." Victor paused. "She gave him you." Caleb absorbed this slowly. "She didn't know about the transactions," he said, and it came out less certain than he intended. "She didn't know the details," Victor said. "She didn't need to. She knew you well enough to know the shape of the thing." He turned to look at the parking structure's far wall, his hands loose on the steering wheel. "Men like you always have a thing, Caleb, a hidden architecture. The women who live with you for years, they can't see it clearly while they're inside it, but they feel it, the weight of it. The specific kind of wrong that doesn't have a name yet." He paused. "She felt it. She just didn't know what to do with that feeling until she found someone who could translate it into evidence." Caleb said nothing for a long moment. Then, "Can it be challenged?" "The evidentiary chain." "In what court? Devereaux isn't presenting this through his own people. He's going through legitimate investigators who received it through channels that will hold scrutiny. Your attorneys can challenge the divorce evidence. You cannot challenge the federal dimension, not on authenticity grounds." "There has to be something." "There isn't." "Victor, I'm paying you significant money to tell me there's something." Victor looked at him without expression. "Then I'll keep your money and tell you anyway. There isn't. What he built is complete. The question now isn't whether the evidence holds. The question is what you do in the next 12 hours before it enters the formal record." "Which is what?" Victor took a slow breath. "There are 2 options," he said. "Option 1 is that you instruct Ford to approach the opposing counsel tonight with a settlement offer. Full concession on marital assets. Vanessa gets what she should have been offered 6 months ago. It won't stop the federal exposure. Nothing stops that now, see? But it might affect how the divorce proceeding is characterized in coverage. It might create a narrative of cooperation versus one of total war." "And option 2? Victor's expression did not shift. "Option 2 is that you use the 12 hours differently. There are people I can contact who can reach Devereaux's people and communicate that certain information that he may not want surfaced. concerning the port interests, concerning activities in 2019 that are documented somewhere he doesn't know they're documented, could become relevant if this goes the way it's going. Caleb stared at him. You're suggesting I threaten Lucien Devereaux, he said. I'm presenting options. That's insane. Option 1 is available, Victor said. Caleb looked at the paper on the dashboard, at the transfer amounts and the communication timestamps and the names of buyers he had met through intermediaries in 3 cities and believed were safely behind enough layers to never reach him directly. Get out of the car, he said suddenly. Victor blinked. Once. I need a minute, Caleb said. Caleb, get out of the car, Victor. Victor got out of the car. Caleb sat alone in the idling vehicle in the lowest level of a West 30s parking structure at 1:15 in the morning and stared at evidence of his own ruin laid out in black print on a single sheet of paper. And for approximately 90 seconds, he simply breathed, because breathing was the only thing he could do that didn't require a decision. Then he picked up his phone. He did not call Ford. He did not call Victor back. He called a number that was not saved in his phone, a number he had memorized specifically because it should never be written anywhere. And when the line connected and no one spoke on the other end, he said a name. A single name. A name that corresponded to a person he had been introduced to through Victor 18 months ago and had hoped never to meet again. The line disconnected after 4 seconds. Caleb put the phone in his jacket pocket. He sat for another moment. Then he got out of the car and found Victor standing near the concrete pillar 12 feet away, smoking, looking at the oil-stained floor. Neither option, Caleb said. Victor looked at him. I have another play. Vanessa did not sleep. She sat in the living room of the apartment she had rented after leaving the Sterling residence, a clean, spare space on the Upper West Side that she had furnished with the specific minimalism of someone who was not yet sure how long they would need it. And she went through documents with the lamp on, and the city making its nighttime sounds through the window, and a cup of tea going cold on the table beside her. At 2:10 in the morning, her phone buzzed. Not a call. A text. From a number she did not recognize. You should ask your partner what he did in Savannah in 2019. Ask him before tomorrow. You deserve to know what you're standing next to. She read it twice. Then she sat very still for approximately 30 seconds, and the apartment around her did its ordinary thing, the refrigerator cycling, a cab somewhere outside, the building's heat working through the pipes and the walls. And she experienced the specific sensation of a person who has been braced for something and then felt the ground move in a direction they hadn't anticipated. She did not call Lucien immediately. She put the phone face down on the table and breathed for a moment and thought about what she knew, which was that frightened men do specific things when they run out of options they were comfortable with. She had watched Caleb operate for 3 years. She understood the architecture of how he escalated. She had described it to Lucien in detail during those late conversations over the previous months. She turned the phone back over. She called. He answered before the second ring. I know, he said. She closed her eyes briefly. You know he contacted someone. My people flagged the call 40 minutes ago. I was going to reach you in the morning. He sent me a message about Savannah, 2019. Silence on the line. Not the silence of someone caught. The silence of someone deciding how much to say and in what order. Lucien. There was a situation in 2019, he said carefully. A transaction involving one of the port's subsidiaries. A man was involved in it who later became connected to the chain I used to document Caleb's transactions. What kind of situation? A pause. The kind I've had. The kind I don't discuss in detail over any line. Was it illegal? Vanessa. Was it? Almost everything I've done for 20 years exists somewhere on that spectrum, he said, and his voice was absolutely even. No apology in it, no performance of shame, just the statement of a man who has made decisions and lived inside them for long enough that he has stopped pretending they were different than they were. That's not new information. You knew what I was when you called me. You knew what you were asking for. I knew you were dangerous, she said. I didn't know there was documentation of something specific that Caleb could use. He can't use it. Anything in that chain is inadmissible in the context of your case and would expose him to counterexposure that makes his situation significantly worse than it already is. That's not the point. Then what is the point? Vanessa stood up from the couch and walked to the window and looked out at the street below. The orange pools of streetlight, the few people still moving at this hour, the ordinary night of a city that kept going regardless of what was happening in its buildings. "The point," she said quietly, "is that I need to know if I've traded one man's secrets for another man's." The line was quiet. "If what he has on you is real," she continued, "and if it's something that can be surfaced regardless of legal admissibility, in the press, in rival channels, in whatever way frightened men surface things when they're cornered, then I need to know. Tonight. Not because I'm going to run from it, because I'm not going to let tomorrow happen without understanding what I'm actually walking into." Lucian was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "There was a man in Savannah," he said, "a logistics manager. He was skimming from port operations that I had an interest in. The situation was handled." A pause. "The handling was not something I would choose to explain in a courtroom." "Handled how?" "He lost his livelihood, his license, several relationships that mattered to him." Another pause. "He is alive, Vanessa. I want you to understand that part clearly. He is alive and living in another state and has not been touched in 4 years. But the way I removed him from the operation, there are records of that process that would not reflect well in certain contexts." Vanessa absorbed that. "That's what Caleb found. That's what someone in Caleb's orbit found and delivered to him tonight as leverage." "Yes." She turned from the window. "Can he use it?" "Not without destroying himself faster than it destroys me," Lucian said. "The chain of how he obtained it runs back through Victor Hale, who has his own exposure relative to Caleb's transactions. It's mutually assured in the most practical sense. A lawyer would tell him the same thing Ford is almost certainly telling him right now, which is that the play is suicidal." "Caleb doesn't always listen to his lawyers." "No," Lucian said, "he doesn't." Another silence. Vanessa pressed her fingertips against the cold glass of the window. "He made another call after he found the information," she said. "Someone not in his contacts. You said your people flagged it." "Yes." "Who was it to?" The pause this time was different, shorter, but denser. "We're working on identifying the number," Lucian said. "It's a clean line, burner or near equivalent. The call lasted 4 seconds. 4 seconds is enough to deliver instructions." "Yes." "What kind of instructions can you deliver in 4 seconds to a memorized number on a clean line?" Lucien's voice was very steady when he answered. "The kind you've prepared in advance," he said. "The kind where the other person already knows the context and only needs a signal." The cold from the window glass was moving through Vanessa's fingertips now, up into her hand, into her wrist. She pulled her hand back. "He's not trying to negotiate," she said. "No." "He's not trying to surface the Savannah information as leverage." "No." That call was something different. "Then what is it?" Lucien's answer was immediate and delivered in a tone that she had heard from him only once before, in a phone call 3 months ago when she had first told him what Caleb had done, and his voice had gone to this particular register, the one that did not carry anger because it was below anger, the one that was the sound of a conclusion being reached. "He's decided that if he can't win the case," Lucian said, "he's going to try to make sure there's no one left to testify in it." The apartment went very cold. "Lucien, listen to me carefully," he said. "Don't open your door tonight for anyone who isn't me. Don't use your car. Don't go anywhere alone. I'm sending someone to your building in the next 20 minutes, and I need you to let them in." "You think he would actually—" "I think he made a 4-second call to a memorized number at 1:15 in the morning after finding out that everything is collapsing around him," Lucian said. "And I think men who believe they are entitled to win will do the thing they've always told themselves they would never do. The moment they understand that losing is—" The 20 minutes Lucian promised became 14. Vanessa heard the knock at her door at 1:43 in the morning. 2 quick, 1 slow, a pattern she had not been told to expect but recognized immediately as deliberate, as coded. And she crossed the apartment with her phone in her hand and her heart doing something irregular in her chest that she refused to call fear because naming it would make it larger than she could manage right now. She looked through the peephole. A woman, 30-something, compact, dark jacket, hair pulled back, standing with her hands visible at her sides in the specific posture of someone who has been trained to make themselves readable at a door. Behind her, partially visible at the edge of the peephole's curved view, a man with his back to the door facing the hallway. Vanessa opened the door. "Ms. Moretti," the woman said. Not a question. "My name is Reyes. I work for Mr. Devereaux. We need to move you." "Where?" "Secure location. He'll meet you there." She paused, reading Vanessa's hesitation with professional accuracy. "He said to tell you, the Hudson in winter looks the same from every window. You'd understand that." Vanessa understood it. She grabbed her coat. She did not take the elevator. Reyes took her down the stairwell. Concrete steps, the smell of the building's infrastructure, the sound of their footsteps carefully managed. Reyes slightly ahead with one hand near the inside of her jacket, in a way that communicated readiness without display. The man from the hallway followed behind. He did not speak. Did not need to. They came out through a service exit onto the side street and into a black car idling at the curb with its lights off. Vanessa got in. The city moved past the tinted windows in orange and white streaks, familiar and suddenly strange. The way things go strange when you understand that the ordinary landscape you've been moving through has acquired a dimension you weren't accounting for until now. She watched it and breathed and kept her hands flat on her thighs and thought about what Lucien had said. Men who believe they are entitled to win. She had been married to one for 3 years. She knew what they were capable of when the arithmetic stopped working in their favor. The car stopped in front of a building on the Upper East Side, a brownstone that showed nothing particular about itself from the outside, the kind of building that exists in this city as pure surface, no indication of what it contains or what it costs or who moves through it. Reyes brought her inside through a lobby that had no doorman, through a key card corridor, into an elevator that required a second key card at a specific floor, and then into a space that opened up with the quiet authority of somewhere that has been designed with security as its primary architectural principle and comfort as a secondary one. Lucien was already there. He was standing at the window with his back to the room and his phone at his ear, and he did not turn immediately when she came in, which told her the call was not finished, and she did not interrupt it, just stood near the door while Reyes disappeared into another part of the apartment, and the city made its presence known through the glass in its usual silent, enormous way. His voice when he spoke into the phone was in a register she had heard before but not often. Very flat, very precise. The kind of voice that has stripped all performance out of itself, because performance is a luxury you set aside when the work requires everything. "I understand. Don't move on it until I confirm. The timing matters more than the action." "Yes." A pause. "Tell him I said that specifically. He'll know what it means." He ended the call. He turned. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the courthouse hallway, taking inventory, checking, his eyes moving across her face with a thoroughness that was not romantic in this moment, but functional, the checking of a man who needs to know that the thing he has been protecting is intact. "Are you all right?" he said. "I'm functional," she said. "What's happening?" He set his phone on the table beside him and told her. The number Caleb had called at 1:15 in the morning had been identified 40 minutes after the call was made. It belonged to a man named Dennis Karp, a name that meant nothing to Vanessa but clearly meant something to Lucien's people, because the identification had come quickly, which meant the name was already in a file somewhere. Karp was a freelance security contractor, background in private investigation, and what the industry called asset recovery, which was the kind of language that covered a range of activities, some of which were legal, and some of which depended entirely on what the client was asking for. "He's been hired before to create situations," Lucien said. "Not directly violent, scenarios, circumstances that produce outcomes without Caleb's fingerprints on the outcome." "What kind of scenarios?" 2 years ago, a business partner who was about to file a whistleblower complaint experienced a series of personal crises in rapid succession. His wife received fabricated evidence of infidelity. His banking access was disrupted. A child custody matter that had been resolved was reopened based on anonymous information submitted to family services. Lucien's voice was level throughout. The whistleblower complaint was never filed. Vanessa sat down on the edge of the couch. He did that, she said. His money paid for it. Yes. And tonight's call. We don't know the specific instruction yet, but Karp doesn't do financial disruption in the middle of the night. His nighttime work is physical. The word landed in the room with the weight that words carry when they stop being abstract. Physical. Vanessa looked at Lucien. He's not going to touch me, she said, and it came out not quite steady, which was honest, which was the first time in a long time she had let something honest come out without managing it first. No, Lucien said, he's not. Because of your people. Because of my people. And because of what happens to anyone who tries. He said it without inflection, without the performance of threat, just the statement of a fact he was entirely comfortable with. But there's another dimension. She waited. If Karp's instruction was not about you directly, Lucien said, then it may be about the evidence, the documentation chain. There are 3 people whose testimony anchors the federal material, 2 of whom are in locations that Caleb should not have access to, and 1 of whom we placed specifically because we anticipated this kind of move. He paused. The 3rd person's location was communicated through a channel I believed was clean. Believed? There may be a leak inside my own structure, he said, and the way he said it, flatly, without drama, but with a weight underneath the flatness, told her that this was not a theoretical concern. Someone who has been talking to Caleb's people, not consistently, not selling everything, but enough. Vanessa stared at him. Enough to tell Caleb where the 3rd witness is, she said. Yes. Then we need to move the witness. Already in motion. He picked up his phone again, checked something, set it back down. But the window is narrow, and if the leak is who I think it is, there's additional exposure I need to address tonight before tomorrow's hearing. Who do you think it is? Lucien looked at her for a moment in a way that was different from his other looks. Something in it that was not quite reluctance, but was adjacent to it. The expression of a man who does not enjoy being wrong and is currently in the process of accepting that he has been. Someone who has been with me for 6 years, he said. The room was quiet. I'm sorry, Vanessa said. Don't be. It's information. I use information. He crossed to the table and picked up a folder she hadn't noticed there when she came in. He opened it without sitting down. Here's what tonight requires. The 3rd witness needs to be relocated by 4 in the morning. My people are handling that. The leak needs to be identified and contained before 6, which I'm addressing directly. And I need Diane Chu's team to know that there may be an attempt to access the evidentiary files Chu's firm is holding for tomorrow. Not physically, digitally, a disruption attempt. So they need their security architecture confirmed before 9. I can call Diane. Not yet. Not at 2 in the morning. I'll have my technical people contact hers through a protocol she'll recognize as legitimate at 6:30. He paused. What I need from you right now is to stay in this building until morning. I can do that. Without arguing about it. She looked at him. Vanessa. I said I can do that. He studied her for a moment. Something moved through his expression that was not quite relief, but was close enough to it that she noticed, and she stored it, because those moments, the ones where something human broke the surface of the machinery he had built himself into, were not nothing. There's a room in the back, he said. Sleep if you can. I won't be able to sleep. Then don't, but stay off your phone except for Diane's number, and only if I tell you to call. He turned back to the window. I have work to do. She stayed on the couch. She watched him work. There was a particular quality to Lucien Devereaux working that she had observed over 3 months and still found difficult to fully characterize. It was not frantic, was not even visibly intense in the way that people who perform urgency are intense. It was focused in the way of something with a very long burn. He made calls. He read things on his phone and responded with the unhurried precision of someone whose every communication is premeditated. He spoke to 3 different people in 90 minutes and said different things in different registers to each of them, modulating himself with an unconscious accuracy that reminded her of watching someone play an instrument they had mastered so long ago that the mastery was invisible. At 3:40 in the morning, one of his calls lasted 11 minutes, and when it ended, he lowered the phone and stood with his back to her for a long moment before he turned. The witness is out, he said. She's relocated. Vanessa exhaled. And the leak? Contained. She did not ask what contained meant in his vocabulary. She had made her peace with that category of question 3 months ago, in a conversation they'd had where she had said, "I need to know there's a line," and he had said, "There is," and she had said, "Show it to me," and he had spent the next 40 minutes describing what it looked like and why, and she had believed him. Not because she was naive, but because she had spent enough years around men who thought power meant no limits to recognize. In someone who actually had power, the specific and rare quality of a person who had chosen their limits deliberately and lived inside them. At 4:20, she fell asleep on the couch with her shoes still on. When she woke, the light through the windows was the gray-blue of very early morning, and Lucian was still awake, standing at the window with a cup of coffee he appeared to have made at some point in the hours she had been asleep. He heard her move and turned. "It's 6:10, he said. She sat up. Her neck ached. Her mouth was dry. She felt the specific dishevelment of a few hours of unplanned sleep and the specific clarity that sometimes comes with it, the stripping away of everything that isn't essential. "The hearing starts at 9, she said. "I know. Are you going to tell me what the plan is for today? Most of it you already know." "The part I don't." He turned from the window and sat down across from her in a chair that was positioned slightly away from the table, the posture of a man who has made his decisions and is no longer in the process of making them, who has entered the phase where the decisions simply execute. "At 2 o'clock this afternoon," he said, "federal investigators will file emergency documentation with the court based on the evidence package I prepared. They've had the package for 11 days. They were waiting for my signal on timing." "Why today specifically?" "Because Caleb spent last night trying to move the documentation. He attempted to access 3 of the corporate structures to initiate dissolution proceedings that would complicate the evidentiary chain. The attempt was logged and has been added to the package." He paused. "He did exactly what I needed him to do, what frightened men always do. He moved, and every move created a record, and the records are now part of what gets filed at 2 o'clock. Vanessa looked at him. "You let him panic on purpose." "I made sure he had things to panic about on purpose," Lucian said. "There's a distinction." "Is there?" "He made the choices. I made the choices available." She looked at the window. The city was coming back to itself in the early light, resuming its ordinary enormity, the million simultaneous lives that had nothing to do with this room or this night. "And the hearing this morning," she said, "before 2 o'clock. Diane continues the financial testimony. Caleb's team will push harder this morning because they don't know yet that what's coming at 2 makes the morning irrelevant. They'll spend energy on a fight that's already over." He set down the coffee cup. "But there's one thing that may happen this morning that I need you to be prepared for." She waited. "Caleb knows he's losing," Lucienne said. "He knew it when he made that call last night. He knows it more this morning because the corporate access attempts failed and he'll be getting that news in the next hour. What men like him do when they know they've lost, Vanessa, when they've exhausted the structural options and the hidden options and the last resort options, is they do something personal, something direct, something that makes the loss mean something to them, even if it doesn't change the outcome." She understood what he was saying. "He'll come at me in the courtroom." "Possibly." "Verbally, in front of the judge and cameras." "Possibly, or physically. Caleb has never been a physically violent man in public, but last night was a shift." Lucian's voice remained level, but carried something underneath the level. Cornered men don't stay the version of themselves that operated in conditions of safety. They become something else. She knew. She had seen the becoming, in private, over 3 years, in moments that left no marks you could photograph, and every mark that doesn't show. "I can handle him," she said. "I know you can." "I don't need—" "I know," Lucian said again, and he said it differently the second time, without interruption, without correction, with the specific quality of a man who has actually heard the thing the person across from him is saying and isn't going to dispute it. "I know you can handle it. I'm going to be in the room anyway." She looked at him. "Not to handle it for you," he said, "just to be in the room." The morning came in fully through the windows. At 8:15, Vanessa was in the bathroom of the spare room, running cold water over her wrists, and looking at herself in the mirror the way she had looked at herself in the courthouse bathroom the previous morning. And the woman looking back at her was the same woman, and was also different in a way that was not visible in any single feature, but existed in the whole of the face, in the set of it, in the particular quality of the eyes. She dried her hands. She put her coat on. She went to find Lucien. He was at the door already. His black overcoat still damp from the night before, though. He'd been inside all the hours since, or perhaps this was a different overcoat. She understood that there were dimensions of his life that operated in parallel to the parts she had access to, and she had decided that understanding did not require her to map every one of them. They went down in the elevator together without speaking. In the car, she watched the city receive the morning, the delivery trucks, the early pedestrians, the particular energy of a city that has been running all night and has simply changed register rather than stopped. And she thought about the 3 years behind her and the day in front of her and the specific weight of arriving at a moment you have been moving toward for so long that its approach has become so familiar that the actual arrival feels almost strange. "Lucien," she said. He turned from the window. "After today," she said, not completing it. He looked at her for a long moment. "After today is a different question," he said. "I know, I'm asking it anyway." He held her gaze with the gray eyes that had learned over the previous months, in increments so small she had only tracked them in retrospect, to carry something in addition to the cold they'd always had. "After today," he said, "we figure out what we're allowed to be." She held that. The car moved through Manhattan toward the courthouse, and the rain from the previous day had left everything washed and briefly clarified the way rain sometimes does. The city's surfaces returned to something close to what they were before accumulation. And Vanessa thought about the word allowed, the specific word he had chosen, not able, not willing, but allowed, as if there were a permission structure involved that they both needed to locate before they could proceed. She understood that. She had spent most of her life navigating the gap between what she was allowed to be and what she actually was. Today, that gap was closing. The car stopped at the courthouse. Through the window, she could see the press presence had doubled since the previous day. More cameras, more reporters, the specific hungry cluster that forms when a story is reaching its climax, and everyone can feel it even if no one knows the exact shape of what's coming. She could see Caleb's SUVs already at the curb. He was already inside. "He's been in the building since 7:30, Reyes said from the front seat, reading from her phone. "His team has been in conference with Ford since they arrived. Brielle Kane is not with him this morning." Vanessa noted that. The absence of Brielle was information. It meant Caleb had made some calculation about presentation, or it meant Brielle herself had made a calculation, and either one told her something about the shape of this morning. She opened the car door. The press surged immediately. The cameras, the shouted questions, the specific wall of attention that had nothing to do with her as a person and everything to do with what she represented in the story they were narrating. She walked through it without stopping, without turning, without giving any of it a surface to attach to. Behind her, she heard the second car door. She did not look back. She knew he was there. Inside the courthouse, in the elevator, she saw herself in the polished metal of the doors. Her own reflection, standing straight, the coat she'd had on since last night, the face that had made it through the night and was going to make it through the morning. The elevator opened on the second floor. Caleb was standing in the hallway. Not with his attorneys, not with support. Alone, which was wrong, which was the first wrong thing, because Caleb Sterling had not moved through a professional environment without legal counsel physically present since the proceedings began. He was alone, and he was looking directly at her, and his face had none of yesterday's performance in it. The managed expression, the calibrated confidence, the public-facing version, all of it was gone. What was underneath it was something she had seen only in private, in the apartment, in the late nights when the architecture he maintained had worn thin enough to show what lived inside it. He was not the Caleb who arrived at courthouses with perfectly held umbrellas. He was the other one. "Vanessa," he said. His voice was rough, not from sleeplessness, though he clearly hadn't slept, from something interior, something that had been building all night and had reached a pressure the container couldn't hold. She stopped. She did not step back. "Caleb," she said, levelly, You have to stop this, he said. Whatever you think you're doing, whatever he told you this was going to look like it, you have to stop. I'm not stopping anything. You don't understand what you've put in motion. He took a step toward her, and she held her ground because she had spent 3 years learning that holding ground was the only thing that worked, and flinching was the only thing that cost you. This isn't just about us. This isn't just about the money. What happens today, what they do with what you gave him, that follows me everywhere, that ends things I... Good, she said. He stopped. She looked at him directly. Caleb, it should end. All of it. That's the point. Her voice was steady in a way that cost her something, but she spent it without regret because she had been saving it for exactly this. I'm not going to ask you to understand what this felt like from where I was standing. I'm not asking for anything from you. I'm standing in this hallway because today is the day it's over, and no version of this conversation changes that. His jaw worked. His eyes were doing the thing. The recalculating, the searching for the angle, the habitual scan for the leverage point and finding nothing, which was the specific crisis. A man who has operated exclusively through leverage, encountering a person who has removed herself from every lever he has access to. He's going to destroy you too, Caleb said. You know that. Men like him. Don't, she said. Don't do that. Don't try to save me from the person you're afraid of by making it about my welfare. I've heard that language before. I know what it is. He looked at her, and something shifted in his face. Not softening, not understanding. Something harder than either of those things. The specific look of a man who has run out of the language that has always worked and is arriving at the boundary of himself. The place where the only thing left is the thing he told himself he would never be in public. His hand came up. Not fast. Not the speed of violence planned and practiced. The speed of a man unraveling. And then it stopped, because Lucien's hand was around his wrist. Lucien had come out of the stairwell door 12 feet down the hall and covered the distance without sound, without announcement, in the time between one breath and the next, and now he held Caleb's raised wrist in a grip that was not squeezing, that was not demonstrating force, that was simply an absolute physical fact, a termination of the motion, a stop. The hallway had people in it, clerks, an attorney from another case, a bailiff at the far end, and every one of them went still. Lucien looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at Lucien, and in Caleb's eyes was everything that had been building since the previous afternoon. The fear, the fury, the collapsing of a structure he had spent years believing was permanent. And in Lucien's eyes was something colder and quieter than all of that, something that did not match Caleb's temperature at all, something that existed at a different register entirely. The register of a man for whom this moment is not a crisis, but simply the moment that comes. Lucien's grip on Caleb's wrist did not tighten. That was the thing Vanessa would remember later. Not the violence of the moment, which never arrived, but the absence of it, and what that absence communicated. Lucien held Caleb's raised wrist with the flat certainty of a man who has already calculated every possibility in the next 30 seconds and found none of them require additional force. He simply held it, the way you hold a door open, the way you hold a fact. Caleb looked at that grip. Then he looked at Lucien's face, and whatever was left of the composure he had walked into this building with, the last structural remnant of the man who had arrived at courthouse steps with a perfectly held umbrella and a pregnant mistress on his arm, specifically to communicate that he had already won. That remnant went. Not loudly. That was the other thing she would remember. It went quietly. A slow deflation, the specific collapse of a person who has been holding a shape that required tremendous ongoing effort and has simply, finally, stopped being able to hold it. His shoulders dropped. His face lost the last of its architecture. He looked, for the first time in the years she had known him, like exactly what he was. A man who had built everything on the assumption that he would never be required to pay the full price of anything, standing in a courthouse hallway at 8:40 in the morning with his wrist in another man's hand and nowhere left to go. Lucien released him. He stepped back. He did not look at Caleb again. He looked at Vanessa. She held his gaze for a moment, one breath, two, and then she turned and walked toward the courtroom doors without looking back at Caleb Sterling. because she had made a decision somewhere in the previous 24 hours, in the cold apartment and the parking structure phone call and the early morning window overlooking the city, that she was finished turning back. That the direction she was moving in had cost her enough that the only thing that honored the cost was to keep moving in it. She heard Caleb's attorneys behind her, the rapid sound of Ford arriving from somewhere, and the clipped exchange of voices she didn't bother to parse. She pushed open the courtroom door. She sat down. She placed her hands flat on the table in front of her, fingers spread, and felt the solidity of it. The wood, the grain, the real material fact of a surface that did not move, and let that steadiness travel up through her palms and into her arms until her breathing slowed to something manageable. Diane appeared beside her 3 minutes later with the expression of a woman who had been briefed by text on the hallway situation and had processed it with the efficient practicality that 23 years of litigation develops in a person. "Are you all right?" "Yes." "What he did in that hallway is on record. Rhea's documented it. We can add it to—" "No," Vanessa said. Diane paused. "I don't want to add it," Vanessa said. "I don't need more. We have enough. I want to finish what we came here to do, and I want to do it with what we already have." Diane studied her for a moment. "All right," she said. The courtroom filled. Caleb came in 5 minutes before the session began, and he walked to his table without looking at anyone. And he sat down, and he placed his hands in his lap, and he looked at the surface of the table in front of him with the expression of a man who is performing the final act of composure available to him and is not sure how long he can sustain it. Garrison Ford sat beside him. Ford's face was professionally neutral in the way it always was, but there was something in the set of his jaw that was not neutrality, that was the specific tightness of a lawyer who has been told things in the previous 12 hours that have changed his assessment of the situation he is managing and is now in the process of recalibrating everything while maintaining the surface of a man who recalibrates nothing. Lucien entered last. He came in from the back of the courtroom and moved to the gallery row directly behind Vanessa and sat down. And the room did what it always did when he entered. That particular atmospheric shift, the collective recalibration of everyone present, and then it settled back into its official formality, and Judge Myers took the bench. The morning session began. Dr. Osei continued her financial testimony with the same metronome precision she had brought the previous day, and Garrison Ford cross-examined with a discipline that was technically correct and substantially hollow, because the questions he was asking were the questions of an attorney trying to slow momentum rather than reverse it, and everyone in the room could feel the difference. At 10:45, Diane introduced the final financial exhibits. At 11:20, Ford made a motion to dismiss on procedural grounds that Judge Myers denied in 4 sentences. At 11:50, there was a recess. In the hallway during the recess, Vanessa stood near the window again, the same window as the previous day, the city below having returned to its ordinary business under clearing skies. And Diane stood beside her, and they did not speak for a long time. The comfortable silence of two people who have been through enough together in a short period that silence has become one of their shared languages. "Ford asked for a sidebar with me during the recess," Diane said finally. Vanessa turned. "He wants to discuss settlement terms." She let that land. "This morning," she said, "before the afternoon session." "Before 2 o'clock, Vanessa said. Diane looked at her steadily. "Before 2 o'clock. Vanessa turned back to the window. Below, a woman was walking a dog on the courthouse plaza. A large, unhurried dog that stopped to investigate something at the base of a stone planter, while the woman waited with the patient air of someone who has been waiting for this dog their entire life and has no objections to it. An ordinary moment, the kind the city produces continuously without noticing. "What are his terms?" Vanessa said. "He hasn't stated them yet. He wants the conversation first." "My terms haven't changed. Full asset disclosure. The marital estate valued as it should have been from the beginning, what the financial restructuring stole accounted for, and a clean, uncontested decree with no narrative conditions, no NDA, no statement of any kind from me, no restrictions on what I do or say afterward." He'll push back on the NDA. Then the conversation ends. Diane absorbed that with the steadiness that was her professional baseline. "He's scared," she said. "I know. Ford is scared too, which is different. Ford is worried about what 2 o'clock brings for his client in ways that go beyond the divorce proceeding. He should be. Vanessa. Diane's voice shifted slightly. Not softer exactly, but more direct, which for Diane was its own kind of softness. What happens at 2 o'clock is going to be significant. The coverage alone, regardless of the legal outcome, is going to be something Caleb carries for the rest of his public life. I need to know that you've thought about what you carry too. Vanessa looked at her. I've carried it for 3 years, she said. I know what it weighs. That's not what I mean. Then what do you mean? Diane paused in the way of someone choosing words with the precision of someone who knows that the wrong ones will close a door. I mean that the man sitting behind you in that courtroom, what he did to build this case, what it took, what it cost people who were in the way of it, that has weight too. And you're going to be standing in the light of that alongside everything else. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. I know what he is, she said finally. I know you do. I knew before I called him. I called him anyway. Yes. And I would do it again. She said it without defiance, without the heat of someone defending a decision they're uncertain about. Just the flat honesty of a person who has examined the choice from every angle and arrived at the same conclusion each time. Not because it was clean, it wasn't, but because the alternative was disappearing, and I am finished disappearing for men who needed me smaller to feel large. Diane held her gaze for a long moment, then she nodded once. I'll meet with Ford, she said. I'll tell him your terms. She walked toward the conference room. Vanessa stayed at the window. At 12:40, Garrison Ford agreed to every term. The settlement documentation was drafted in a conference room on the 3rd floor by 3 attorneys working in the clipped, rapid shorthand of people who have been told to produce something specific in limited time. Diane reviewed every line. She changed 4 phrases, deleted 1 clause entirely, and added a provision specifying that the asset valuation would be conducted by an independent auditor whose selection required mutual agreement, a protection against the kind of procedural delay that had plagued the preceding 6 months. Caleb signed at 1:17 in the afternoon. He signed in a conference room with Ford on one side and a notary on the other, and no one else present. Vanessa did not go into the room. There was nothing she needed to see in that room. The signature was the thing, not the signing. She waited in the hallway. When Diane came out holding the signed document, Vanessa looked at it, the papers, the signatures, the notary seal, and felt something she had not expected to feel, which was not triumph, not relief, not the clean satisfaction of a thing finished. What she felt was something older and quieter than any of those things, something that lived below the level of reaction, in the part of a person that keeps the true count of what things have cost. She had won. The word felt strange in her mind. Not wrong, just strange. Like a word in a language you learned late in life. You know what it means. You know how to use it, but there will always be a moment of translation between hearing it and feeling it. It's done, Diane said. Yes, Vanessa said. The formal decree will be entered by the court within 48 hours. The asset audit begins next week. You'll have access to your accounts by Friday. Thank you, Diane. Diane looked at her with the expression of a woman who has seen this moment in many variations over 23 years and has never found it simple, regardless of the outcome. Take care of yourself, she said. Not the strategic version, the actual version. Then she went to manage the paperwork. At 1:58 in the afternoon, 2 federal investigators entered the courthouse through a side entrance. They carried documentation. They were met by the building's federal liaison officer and taken to a specific room where a specific judge was waiting. Not Myers, a different judge, one whose jurisdiction covered what the documentation contained. Vanessa was not present for that. She was in the lobby, putting on her coat, when she heard the sound of movement from the upper floors. Not running exactly, but the accelerated movement of people whose ordinary pace has been replaced by the pace of a situation changing rapidly. She understood what it was. She buttoned her coat slowly. Lucien appeared at her side. She had not heard him approach, which no longer surprised her. She had stopped being startled by the specific quality of his presence, the way it arrived without announcing itself. "It's filed," he said. "I know." He looked at the lobby doors, the glass, the afternoon light coming through them, The plaza beyond, where a small cluster of press had gathered with the instinct of people who sense a story accelerating. He's going to be in that building for a long time, Lucian said. Yes. His attorneys are with him now. They'll arrange the conditions. It won't be public until tonight, probably. It doesn't need to be public for it to be real. No, he agreed. It doesn't. They stood in the lobby together for a moment. The two of them, the glass doors, the light, and the building went about its federal business around them, clerks and attorneys and security personnel moving through the space with the continuous, purposeful motion of an institution that processes human difficulty as its primary function and has developed an extraordinary capacity to keep moving regardless of what any specific day contains. Vanessa looked at the doors. "Let's go," she said. Outside, the press cluster surged at the sight of her, and she moved through them with the same steadiness she had been practicing for months, the forward motion that didn't invite or deny, that simply continued. She heard her name called from 6 different directions. She heard Lucien's name. She heard Caleb's name, questions about Caleb, questions about what was happening on the upper floors, and she answered none of them. At the curb, the car was waiting. She got in. Lucien got in beside her. The car moved into Manhattan traffic, and the courthouse disappeared behind them, and Vanessa sat in the back seat and looked at her hands in her lap, the left one, the right one, the absence of the ring she had not worn in months, and breathed. They were 2 blocks away before either of them said anything. "Victor Hale," Vanessa said. Lucien turned from the window. "What happens to him?" "He has exposure relative to the subsidiary chain. He'll be interviewed. Depending on what he gives, his situation varies." A pause. "He was useful to Caleb. He's been more useful to me. That has some bearing." "And Brielle Kane." Lucian considered it. "She's 26 years old, and she made a calculation that didn't pay out." "She'll manage. She has more intelligence than she was given credit for in that relationship." Vanessa looked out the window. The city moved past. The blocks, the faces, the ordinary velocity of a place that had been doing this for centuries and would keep doing it long after every person in this car was gone. "The man in Savannah," she said. "The logistics manager." Lucian's face did not change. "He's living in Raleigh," Lucian said. "He has a job. His daughter finished high school last year." "You know that." "I keep track." She held that. "Why?" she said. "Because knowing that someone is all right is different from hoping they are. I prefer knowing." She turned to look at him directly. He met her gaze without the deflection that most people use in this kind of scrutiny, without the management of impression. Just the gray eyes and whatever lived behind them, which was more than the cold people saw first and different from the warmth they might have expected if they'd gotten past the cold. "You built something for a year," she said. "You were patient in a way that most people aren't capable of. You gave me a legal outcome instead of the other kind." "Yes." "And you also have a file on a man in Raleigh whose life you ended in a specific way and whose well-being you monitor because knowing is better than hoping." "Yes," he said again, with the same flatness, neither ashamed nor proud of either answer. "Both of those things are true at the same time." "Most true things come in that configuration," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said finally. "I do know that. I've been living inside the configuration my whole life, my father, the world I grew up in, the world I tried to leave." She paused. "The world I called back when I needed it." "Are you sorry you called?" She thought about it honestly, which was the only way she knew how to think about things that mattered. "No," she said. "I'm sorry it was necessary. I'm not sorry I did it." He nodded once. Outside the window, the city had opened up slightly as they moved north. Broader streets, less density, the river appearing briefly between buildings in the way it did in this part of Manhattan, a flash of silver gray between the built environment. "What I said last night," Lucian said, "about after today. About what we're allowed to be." "Yes." She waited. "I've been thinking about that word since I said it," he said. "Allowed. I don't know why I used it. I don't ask permission for things." "You used it because it's accurate," she said. "It's not about permission from other people. It's about permission from yourself." From what you've decided you are. She looked at him. You spent 20 years deciding to be something specific. It becomes a structure. And changing the structure, even when you want to, requires a kind of permission from the self. He was quiet for a moment. You understand that from the other direction, he said. I spent 3 years being told what I was allowed to be by someone else. And before that, I spent my whole life being shaped by a world that had already decided. She looked at her hands again. Deciding for yourself is harder. It's slower. It doesn't come with the kind of certainty that being told does. But it's yours. It's yours, she agreed. The car turned onto a street she recognized. The Upper West Side, her block, the building she had rented with the specific minimalism of a temporary life. I'm not going back to the apartment, she said. Lucienne looked at her. Not permanently, she clarified. I'll go back today. Collect things. But I've been living in a space that was designed for surviving, not for anything else. And I'm done surviving. What comes after surviving? She thought about it. I don't know yet, she said. That's the first honest answer I've been able to give to that question. Something moved in his expression. Not a smile. Lucien Devereaux's face did not default to smiling, and she had stopped expecting it to, had come to understand that what moved through his face was more subtle than that, and more honest for its subtlety. Take the time, he said. I will. The car stopped at her building. She got out. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment and looked up at the building's face, the windows, the ordinary architecture of it, the life she had been temporarily inhabiting. And then she looked back at the car, at Lucienne visible through the window. Come for dinner, she said. Tonight, not the other location. Here. He looked at her. I'll cook, she said. I used to cook before the marriage. I stopped because he had opinions about it. She said it simply, without emphasis, the statement of a fact that had once carried weight and was now simply one item in a list of things she was reclaiming. I want to cook in my own kitchen and eat at my own table and have you sit across from me without a legal team or a crisis requiring management. He held her gaze for a moment. 7 o'clock, he said. 7 o'clock. She turned and went inside. The weeks that followed moved at the speed of institutional process, which is slower than the speed of crisis and faster than the speed of recovery. The asset audit began on a Tuesday and ran for 11 days and confirmed what Dr. Osei had testified to with the additional specificity that documentation always provides, the exact figures, the precise restructuring timeline, the recoverable amounts that now carried Vanessa's name instead of the corporate entities Caleb had dressed them in. Caleb Sterling's federal situation developed along the lines Lucien had described and became public on a Thursday evening through a wire report that 3 major outlets ran simultaneously, which told Vanessa that someone had coordinated the release, though she did not investigate who. The charges were specific and serious, and the coverage was extensive, and then it was not. Because the news moves and Caleb Sterling's particular drama, however significant to the people inside it, was one item in the continuous production of the world's difficulty, and the world had other items. Garrison Ford withdrew from the federal matter within 10 days, citing a conflict of interest that everyone understood to mean he had assessed the exposure of remaining involved and found it unacceptable. Caleb retained new counsel, the kind that specializes in the category of situation he was now in, and the process settled into the long, procedurally complex territory of federal criminal defense that takes years to resolve and produces in the defendant a specific kind of waiting that is its own punishment regardless of what comes at the end of it. Brielle Kane left the Tribeca apartment in the second week. She went to her mother's home in Connecticut. She had the baby in March, a boy, healthy, 7 pounds 4 ounces, and she named him something that had nothing to do with Caleb, which told Vanessa, when she heard it secondhand, something about the woman Brielle had decided to become. Vanessa did not reach out to her. Some debts of solidarity are real, and some are constructions that require you to perform something you don't genuinely feel, and Vanessa had spent too many years performing her way through situations that required honesty to mistake one for the other now. The asset settlement cleared in February. She stood at her kitchen window when the notification came through and looked at the number on her phone screen for a long time. Not because the number was incomprehensible, but because it was real, and real things sometimes require more time to absorb than abstract ones. This was hers, earned across 3 years of a life that had tried to erase her, recovered through a process that had cost her in ways that didn't show on any balance sheet, and now sitting in an account that bore her name and no one else's. She put the phone face down on the counter and finished making coffee. The winter settled fully over the Hudson in January, the river going the specific gray-silver that it goes when the cold is serious and the light is low. Vanessa moved into a different apartment in February. Larger, permanent, the kind of space chosen because it fits the life you're building rather than the emergency you're surviving. She had windows that faced west toward the river, and in the late afternoon the light came through them at an angle that did things to the room that she hadn't planned when she chose the apartment and was glad of every day. She went back to work in her field, research consultancy, the kind of analytical work she had done before the marriage and had stopped during it, because Caleb had opinions about that too, about the independence it gave her, about the network it maintained. She started with 2 clients. By April, she had 7. She cooked in her own kitchen every night she was home. This was not a small thing. She understood it wasn't a small thing. Lucian came for dinner twice a week, sometimes 3 times, and they fell into the rhythm of it the way you fall into rhythms that are right, not dramatically, not with the fanfare of a new beginning, but with the quiet ease of 2 people who have found, after long and complicated routes, a table that fits them both. He was different in that kitchen than he was anywhere she had seen him before. Not soft. She did not think Lucien Devereaux would ever be soft, and she had stopped expecting it, had understood that softness was not the only alternative to hardness, that there was a third thing which was neither and was its own kind of rare. He was present in the kitchen. He watched her cook with the specific attention of someone who has not watched anything that wasn't a threat assessment in a very long time and is relearning what it feels like to simply observe something good. He washed dishes without being asked. She noted that without saying anything about it. One evening in late March, when the winter was finally losing its grip and the river below her windows had shifted from silver to something approaching blue, they were sitting at her table after dinner with the remains of the meal between them and the city doing its evening thing outside, and Vanessa was looking at her coffee cup and thinking about nothing in particular, the specific sustainable nothing of a mind that has finally discharged the acute emergency it's been running on, when Lucian said, "I closed a file last week." She looked up. "The Savannah situation," he said. "Whatever documentation existed of the specifics, I had it destroyed." She looked at him steadily. "Why?" she said. "Because I was keeping it the way I keep things. Out of habit. The habit of maintaining leverage, holding documentation, keeping files on situations so they can be used if necessary." He was looking at the table, not at her, which was unusual for him. "There's no situation there anymore. The man is in Raleigh. He has his life. There's nothing the file protects against. And keeping it was habit. The kind of habit that made sense for 20 years and makes less sense now." She was quiet for a moment. "What other habits are making less sense?" she said. He looked up. The question sat between them with the weight of everything it was actually asking, which was not really about habits at all, or was about habits only as the surface of something deeper. The question of who he was choosing to become now, in this apartment, at this table, with this woman who had come back into his life through the specific alchemy of necessity and something older than necessity. "I'm finding out," he said. She nodded. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. Not grasping, not holding, just the flat warmth of it, the simple placement. He looked at her hand. Then he turned his palm up and held it. Outside the windows, the city ran its perpetual current, the lights coming on in the buildings across the river as the dark settled, the traffic finding its evening rhythms, the 10,000 simultaneous ordinary lives that make up the incomprehensible aggregate of what a city is, none of them knowing or caring what was happening in this particular apartment at this particular table. Vanessa looked at the river. She thought about the courtroom 8 months ago, the charcoal suit, the notepad she had written nothing on, the recording playing through the speaker system with Caleb's voice filling the room like something that had been locked up and was finally being let out. The moment the federal investigators came through the door and the look on Caleb's face that she had promised herself she would not feel satisfaction about, and had then felt satisfaction about anyway, because she was a person, not an aspiration. She thought about the phone call at 2:14 in the morning, 3 months before all of that. The way her hands had shaken while she dialed. The way Lucien's voice had gone absolutely still when she finished telling him, and how she had understood in that stillness that she had finally told the truth to someone with the capacity to hear it. She thought about her father, Alessandro Moretti, the name newspapers wouldn't print, the world she had run from at 23, and wondered, not for the first time, what he would make of this. The daughter who escaped his world by entering it again from a different angle. The woman who used the dark to fight the dark and came out the other side not clean. She had given up clean. She understood now that clean was a story people told themselves about the choices they wanted to have made, but free. Actually free. The river held its color for another minute. Then the light shifted and it changed. Lucien's thumb moved slightly against her hand. Not a signal, not a question, just the unconscious motion of a person present in a moment, which was its own kind of answer to everything she'd been thinking. "Lucienne," she said. "Yes. I want you to know something." He waited with the patience that was the most constant thing about him. "I don't need saving," she said. "I didn't need saving when I called you. I needed a resource. I needed someone who understood what I was dealing with and had the capacity to deal with it alongside me. Those are different things." "I know that," he said. "I know you know it. I'm saying it anyway. Because I spent 3 years in a situation where the narrative of my own life was being written by someone else. I'm writing it myself now. I want you in it. But I'm writing it." He looked at her. "I wouldn't have it any other way," he said. And she believed him. Not because he was perfect. He was not perfect. He was a man who had files on people and operations in international ports, and a 20-year history that would not survive scrutiny in most lights. He was a man who had built himself into a specific kind of weapon, and was, slowly and without ceremony, trying to figure out what else he could be. She was a woman who had run from her inheritance and then borrowed it to survive and was now figuring out what to carry forward and what to put down. They were, both of them, in the middle of the work. That was the truth of it. Not a rescue, not a conclusion, not the clean resolution that stories offer and lives rarely do. Just two people at a table with the remains of a meal and the river outside and the city doing what cities do, running, breathing, failing, rebuilding, the endless, unglamorous work of continuing. And between them the specific kind of quiet that exists not in the absence of history, but in the presence of it, held without either of them needing it to be something other than what it was. Vanessa did not let go of his hand. The river went dark. The apartment held its light. And outside, New York kept moving through the March night the way it always had and always would. Indifferent, magnificent, making no promises to anyone, which was the only honest thing a city could offer. Which, Vanessa thought, was enough. More than enough. It was everything.